Hi, my name is Danielle Levesque and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Maine. I study the energetics of mammals, so how they use energy and what that means for them and their relationships with the environment. So global climate change has forced mammals around the world to move to new locations as temperatures get warmer. Specifically, warmer winters have meant that species that used to be kept south because of the cold have been moving north. A lot of what we do in my lab is to look at how animals and temperature interact, to get clues about things that we need to understand to be able to predict who's going to do well in climate change and who's going to do poorly. The best example of these species movements in Maine is seen in flying squirrels. You might never have seen them since they're shy and only come out at night, but Maine has two species, the northern and the southern flying squirrel. As late as the 1980s, the northerns lived as far down as the Portland Bath area. But if you were to catch a flying squirrel even as far north as Bangor today, you're more likely to catch a southern than a northern. So one of the big projects in my lab right now is to figure out how far north the northerns have moved. What's allowing them to move north, and what's forcing the northerns to move? Is it the southerns? Is it the weather? We're not sure yet. We do this a couple of ways. The first is by hitting the books and finding any kind of record we can find about trapping of small mammals in the state and hoping that they recorded exactly what species it is and enough detail for us to tell the difference between the two. Just by looking at them and looking at a picture of them, they can be pretty hard to tell apart. The northerns are supposed to be a little bit browner, but in general, unless you have them side by side, they can be tricky just to tell just by pictures. But if you look at their mass, it's very obvious the northerns are about twice as big as the southerns. We also set live traps to see what we can catch at different locations across the state. We then catch them and run some lab tests to measure their metabolic rate and evaporative water loss, so how much energy they use and how much water they need to cool down. And then we also look at other responses to heat by using things like infrared thermal imaging that gives us an indication of where in the animal's body they can use to lose heat when it gets too hot. We then combine these measurements with weather patterns to find out how much climate change is responsible for the range changes. We're still at the early stages of the project, but so far we've found that southern flying squirrels can, and this is perhaps not surprising, deal with the heat, but that the northerns might be a little bit more sensitive. We found that there's still northerns as far up as Presque Isle, but we don't know yet how far north in the state the southerns are. And so this research is not just important for understanding where flying squirrels are moving in the state. But flying squirrels are an important part, and small mammals in general are an important part of the food chain, and so they can also help understand what's going to happen to changing prey communities. And we hope that some of the techniques and the methods that we're using and the modeling that we're going to be using the data for will be able to scale up to bigger species such as fisher and marten or moose and deer. So we take the data collected here in Maine and combine it with other projects that we have going on throughout the world, including some recent work in Malaysia and Borneo, to get a big picture of how mammals and climate work, how they got there, and where they might be going in the future.